what's happening everyone? Pragmatic Addict here. So, this review and actually the one coming next are both very special occasions, being that I shouldn't have to give too much background on like my thoughts on them. This one in particular, MaXXXine, is one of my most anticipated films of all time. And then the next one, yeah, Longlegs. If you're curious about my thoughts on it, just look at my playlist. So this is the third installment in the X franchise, which was said to be the finale, like the trilogy, which it still is the finale, from what I'm hearing, at least as far as like MaXXXine's arc, because Ty West recently stated that he does have an idea for a fourth film, but it will be a completely different direction. So as far as a finale, as far as a trilogy, I mean, it's kind of weird when you look at Pearl, but that is connected to X and this film. So I guess this would make it a trilogy, but then again, depending on where he goes with the fourth film, I don't fucking know. But this film takes place 6 years after the events of X, with MaXXXine now making it famous in Hollywood. She's an actress, she's starring in a horror film, but as she's doing this, there is a killer that is running loose, calling themselves the Night Stalker, who is stalking and killing off Hollywood starlets, with MaXXXine being the killer's next victim. And also with this Night Stalker trying to track down MaXXXine Minx, threatening to reveal her sinister past. So I obviously had incredibly high anticipation for this film. I was really curious to see how this would wrap up the character arc of MaXXXine Minx, how it would serve as a trilogy, as a finale. Also really excited and curious and had theories as to how things would come full circle as far as MaXXXine's background, as far as who the killer might potentially end up being. Going even further into this plot with this killer stalking MaXXXine, trying to track her down, threatening to reveal her sinister past. Obviously, there was a lot of questions from me and other fans as to like, well, how did they know about the farmhouse massacre? How do they know about MaXXXine's involvement? Just a lot of theories, a lot of questions, a lot of, expectations and a lot of, big shoes to fill as far as a finale and a final closing character arc. So this film starts off with an intro that I wasn't quite expecting, but it does start in the way that feels like the final conclusion to a character arc. It gives us MaXXXine fans what we've been wanting, what we were hoping for, as far as hints to where the film may potentially go, and offers some really interesting, I'll say, callbacks and references to the past films that fans will definitely pick up on, and even more so, just definitely have a lot of theories as to not only where the film's gonna go, but as far as an overall wrap-up, even after seeing the film now. I really just want to go back and look at this intro and really try and map out what this was aiming at. And I'm just gonna say, as far as this, new era, this new arc for MaXXXine, this era of her finally becoming a star, it just feels like she finally got that real chance. And the last two films, as far as Goth's performances, this already had everything going for it to really make it feel like that conclusion, like everything, has led really to this point. And I love that, this is the intro that the film starts with. Because I really do feel like this first scene, which is that audition scene, it's just a perfect start where the audition, the performance she gives, you're just like, oh yeah, she got that fucking part. Because of all the world building as far as X Factor and, chasing the dream, you just feel the build-up and just the setup of those past films as far as Goth's performances. And as an intro to this finale, this final film, following those other two films with, again, themes of X Factor and not accepting a life they do not deserve. This not only being the first scene of the movie, but also the first scene from Mia Goth in this movie. Just what all goes into this audition scene where there's hints back to MaXXXine's past in X, which is a beautiful, believable recap. Nice tease as to what is coming now. It was just a scene where I was like, us as fans, we need this. But getting past this intro scene, so right away this feels like a follow-up, especially to X. Which, yeah, with this being a direct sequel to X, and feeling more obviously familiar to that film than Pearl, it just makes Pearl feel even more like its own thing. I'm just gonna say that right out of the gate. The references and locations that appear in this film as a sequel to X, this film is just jam-packed full of nods that only X fans may pick up on. And it doesn't, at all feel forced. All the nods and homages in this film, again, it just feels like a follow-up to that film. There's such a tasteful signature here. In MaXXXine and in X, everything from the sexual humor to the, graininess, the no filter, just the kind of maybe even shameless nature to it all. And again, just callbacks to X that aren't right in your face, but more so just if you do notice them, just right from the get-go, this film is full of hype. But one thing I do want to note is that the style and flavor of this movie, it is a big departure from both X and Pearl, which already Pearl and X were a decently big departure as far as feeling and tone from each other. But it's to the extent in this film where sometimes this doesn't even feel like it's from the same director. And as the film story itself, when there's not references to MaXXXine's past or without MaXXXine being on screen, you wouldn't even really know or be able to guess that this is even in the same universe as those films. And I feel like a lot of that, first off, is obviously because this doesn't have that farmhouse setting like the other two films did. This is also inspired by a real life serial killer, which is the Night Stalker, which was a massive thing in the 80s, which this film takes place in. So I'm just gonna say, even as fans of X and or Pearl, I actually am not 100% sure that this will be up all of those fans' alleys. It's also just much more straightforward than those other films. It's a very straightforward crime mystery film. There are also times where it's funny because at times I'm during the movie, part of me was okay, half of this is either much slower than those other films or it's just much faster. Just as far as pace, this is easily the most, and maybe even only, uneven film in the franchise in those regards. And it does play in the same fashion that Pearl did with X, where it feels different than X, but if you really look hard enough, and if you are a fan, you can obviously tell that there are hints, and just in general, more story that is there. There is more lore if you really want to see it, but as its own movie, you can obviously view it. But the difference between this film and Pearl is that you could still enjoy Pearl on its own, other than just viewing it. This one, I don't know if I'd necessarily say that you can enjoy it on its own. I mean, you can watch it, you can follow it on its own, but if you're watching this as a standalone movie, it's just not that exciting for a casual viewer with, no other background to it. It definitely works the best and is meant to be viewed for fans, or at least viewers of those other two films. It's just the weakest in the trilogy, though. And I would even go as far as to say that to an extent, it's not even that it's the weakest in the franchise or it's uneven as far as pacing, but it's honestly just kind of dull. But also just, again, the flavor, whether it be the setting, the horror, the kills, the quotes, the locations, the characters, none of that is nearly as close to either X or Pearl. Because ever since I saw X and Pearl only, before this film, I'd always go back, I'd be okay, which one do I like more, X or Pearl? I don't know, they're both fantastic films, they're both great on their own, and just as a franchise, as a world, as a connection, chef's fucking kiss. This one, as a finale, as a character arc, as far as potential, as able to go forward and end the story and explore the backgrounds and roots, this just is without a doubt not only the weakest film, but it is highly overhyped, and I would actually go as far as to say that it's kind of an unnecessary sequel. Now, I do want to say, getting to the second act, the film definitely does start to really serve as that full-on sequel to X, where we're hearing past characters' names, we're recalling certain events. That's where Kevin Bacon is brought in as the detective. This is what really pushes that story forward as an X sequel and not just as a stalker film inspired by the Night Stalker, because the first act is 100% just setup. It has nothing to really do with the past events as far as Pearl and X, but more so just showing you what MaXXXine's up to now. It's also just setting up for what this film's own original premise is, which the first act of this film really has to do with just setting up this lore and history behind this killer. But this second act, yeah, that is when it really is that follow-up to X, that is when all the stuff that X fans want kind of happens more than anything in the movie. That is when this all starts taking the stage. No pun intended. But I am also going to say now, that is all just really kind of abrupt. It's, even anticlimactic. It's not exactly like hype that it should be. It just kind of comes in as like, okay, this is the point we're getting to now in the story. There's no like real build-up. There's no like intensity. There's no like teasing up to it. Again, it doesn't really come out with a bang where it's like, okay, this is what we were waiting for. It's more so just like, okay, cool, they're starting to talk about that stuff now. Which I'd also just go as far as to say that it kind of feels like Ty West didn't really know whether to center on like this film as an X sequel or as a stalker film. And that's also why this film just feels really odd, because even when I heard this film's premise, also when I like finally saw the trailer, I definitely was the least amped I have been. I remember seeing X, and then like after the credits seeing the trailer for Pearl, I was blown away. And then after Pearl ended, which I thought was like one of the best movies of the year, maybe the best movie of the year, just getting that announcement that MaXXXine was coming at the end of Pearl, discovering this film's premise and also seeing the trailer, it definitely was like a little bit disappointing and a little bit just like rubbed me the wrong way as far as like where the story was not only gonna go as like going forward in this franchise, but also just as a finale. But here's a very interesting thing that I'm gonna say. Even after how much of an icon MaXXXine was in X, and how iconic Mia Goth is as Pearl in Pearl, and even how iconic that character is Pearl, just both in X and obviously in Pearl, the humanity behind MaXXXine in this film as a finale following the characters in X and Pearl was someone with a past that is X. I just couldn't help but really appreciate her in this film. Again, not as iconic per se, but different in a, experienced, grown, matured character arc finale sort of way. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil who the killer is. I'm just going to say, like, as far as this killer stalking MaXXXine and why they want her to be their next victim and how they know about the events, how they've been able to keep a close eye on MaXXXine. As far as like where the film goes with that, I had a lot of theories, a lot of really creative, really exciting theories, just theories that a fan would want out of a full-blown, chaotic, batshit crazy finale to the X franchise. And all I'm going to say is that I think that a lot of fans, especially their guesses, I think they'll be right. The reveal wasn't something where I was like, oh shit. I was just like, oh. I mean, I was kind of right in one of those guesses, and this was one of the top ones. But also just as far as like this character arc and finale and teases that I wanted since X, this just isn't that finale. More so than it is just, I'll say an interesting, laid back, a little bit safe follow-up to X. And nowhere near that full circle finale that obviously many people are gonna have extremely high expectations for. Just as far as like huge reveals that I really wanted since X that will be a huge percentage of why other X and Pearl fans come to see this movie, it's just kind of criminal how much it doesn't stand out in comparison to how exceptional X and Pearl both were, or for how strong this film should stand following those and being a finale. This just isn't it, fellas. This just isn't that finale. And I'm going to give MaXXXine an overall score of a strong negative to a low mixed. This was a really hard review to do, guys, because not only was this my most anticipated film of the entire year, but it was one of my most anticipated films of all time. If this film would have delivered like X and Pearl did, I would have gone as far as to say that it's one of the best horror trilogies ever made. But guys, this just didn't need to happen. This was a sequel that just didn't need to happen. Pearl and X, you can feel the work and the craft and the like passion behind those. Like they were all filmed in secret. They were filmed back to back. They were filmed with an idea, where this one, Ty West, was just kind of like, oh, I think I might have an idea for that third film. And it just wasn't it. But yes, guys, that is going to do it for my thoughts on MaXXXine. My next review will be Longlegs, my next most anticipated film of the year following this. And then after that, we got a film called Oddity, which I'm just gonna say, guys, both Longlegs and Oddity have like perfect 100% scores on Rotten Tomatoes so far. And also, YouTuber and filmmaker Chris Duckman actually posted an early review saying that this was a movie that genuinely fucking scared him. So as far as like July for horror, I am absolutely, like, anticipating the rest of this month. But definitely, guys, let me know what you guys thought about the review, as well as your thoughts on MaXXXine in the comments below, guys. But with all that being said, guys, thank you guys as always for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.